The stars looked calm, but Daniel Carter knew calm could be a lie. He stood by the forward window of the ship and watched a thin thread of light roll along the hull. The ship moved slow through a cold patch of space near the Kuiper Belt. The engines made a gentle hum that carried across the deck. He listened because it reminded him of home, even though Earth had gone quiet months ago. He worked the night watch because he liked the quiet. Long shifts kept his mind steady. The crew respected him because he said little and did a lot. He kept a small photo in his pocket of a blue shoreline, a pier with old wood, a child running with a kite. He looked at it sometimes when the ship felt too wide and the dark felt too close. He did not tell anyone the child in the photo was him. The ship carried a small crew. Sarah Collins ran communications. She moved fast, spoke clear, and still found ways to laugh at mess hall tables. Eric Hall flew fighters and talked about speed like it was a kind of faith. Amelia Ross handled sensors and research gear no one else wanted to touch. She wore a faded jacket from a college on Europa and always smelled like coffee. They were not famous. They were not heroes. They were people who showed up on time and did their jobs in a place where mistakes could kill. Every colony sent messages into the void each day. They told stories, sent trade lists, argued about rules, and sometimes sang songs to keep spirits up. But the channels from Earth stayed empty. Satellite relays around the home world answered pings, but everything coming from the ground was gone. The silence felt like a door locked from the inside. Folks in the colonies tried not to say the word disaster out loud, as if saying it would make it true twice. Daniel had a ritual. At the end of his watch, he would stop by Sarah's station and ask if anything came in. She would shrug and give him a look that said she wished she had better news. He would nod and walk on. It was a small kindness between them. It gave both of them the sense that they were still waiting together and had not given up. That night, a dying probe pinged their array. Its tag showed it had launched from the far side of Pluto decades ago, and should have been dead years back. Its power readout flickered like a lantern in wind. Sarah glanced at the signal and almost let it pass. Old junk screamed in the dark all the time. But this one carried a special flag. A flag used by Earth Command for top-line alerts. She sat up straight and pushed her chair closer. Her breaths turned short. Her fingers moved fast over the console. "Danny," she said, and the word came out thin and careful, like she did not want to break anything by speaking too loud. He walked over. She did not look away from the display. "I think this is from home." He leaned in shoulder to shoulder with her and watched the lines crawl. The probe's buffer had only a few seconds of recorded data. The file stuttered with static and hiss. Sarah worked filters across the noise. She scraped away grit and echoed the clean parts back into the mix. Amelia arrived without being called. She could hear stress in how Sarah's chair creaked and knew trouble when she heard it. Eric slipped in behind them and leaned against the bulkhead, quiet for once. The first pass was a mess. The second pass gave them a shape like a face behind frost. On the third pass, the voice came through. "This is Earth Command," a woman said, low and steady. The way someone speaks when a house is on fire and others look to her for calm. "To all colonies and all ships. If you can hear us, stay clear of Sol space." They crossed the line. They crossed the line. There was a long drag of static. Then 6 words that felt like a promise and a wound. "You will pay for crossing the line." The signal ended in a crack that sounded almost like something breaking. No one spoke. Eric stared at the floor. Amelia's hands hung above the console, fingers spread as if she could hold the sound in the air. Sarah hit replay. They listened again. The same words came. They listened a third time. Daniel watched the crew, not the screen. He saw fear, but he also saw a hard shine in their eyes that had not been there an hour ago. He sent for the duty officer and logged the event with a timestamp and a complete chain of custody. Procedures kept people alive, but part of him wanted to run to the ship's tiny chapel and say the names of cities he loved, not because he thought anyone was listening, but because saying them made them real again. He swallowed and stayed put. Sarah began pulling the message apart. There were faint markers buried in the header, the kind a rushed team would not bother to hide unless they wanted a friend to find them later. She found a partial coordinate set and a string of numbers that looked like a key. Amelia slid into the second seat and brought up a mapping grid. The coordinates did not point at Earth. They pointed far past the orbit of Neptune, out near a stretch of cold rock and dust. A place with no reason to be important unless someone had used it as a blind. They called the bridge. The captain on duty gave them 20 minutes to firm it up. Eric paced a line at the back of the room like a caged runner waiting for a starting gun. The ship changed course with a soft shift that you could feel in your feet if you were used to such things. Daniel did not blink. He watched the starfield drift a hair to the left and knew the helm had taken his crew's hunch seriously. They reached the coordinate zone in under 2 hours. The area looked like any lonely patch of space. Dark rocks, thin rings of crushed ice, light bouncing off nothing. But Amelia found residue from a burn, a smear in the spectrum that hinted at a large ship leaving in a hurry. Sarah measured delay patterns in the probe's ping and found faint reflections that did not fit natural shapes. Eric murmured that it felt like sneaking into a house after a party and smelling smoke while the room still looked clean. A small cloud sat a short distance from them, easy to miss on first scan. It was not a natural cloud. It was the powdered remains of a broken relay, a little machine that should have sat still for centuries. Someone had blasted it not long ago. The debris still held a charge. Amelia asked for permission to use a microdrone. The captain granted it. The drone flew like a moth through the cloud and brushed against a shard of black metal that bent light in an odd way. When Sarah pulled the feed up on her screen, the shard made a faint ripple across the picture. That was a known sign from a species the colonies only talked about in whispers. The name people used for them did not come from any official document. It came from old salvager gossip. They called them the Draxian. No one had proof. No one had a treaty. But ships went missing on the far edge of the Perseus Ridge, and sometimes the wreckage that drifted back carried this same black metal. Daniel did not let the room fall into rumor. He kept his voice level and gave simple orders. Log the shard. Copy everything twice. Send a tight beam packet to Colonial Command. Tag it urgent. He leaned toward Sarah. Run the message again and look for a frame someone forgot to wipe. Sarah nodded. She stretched her neck, flexed her fingers, and dove back into the noise. She knew sound and she knew people, and she had a feel for when someone hit a thing with love instead of fear. The voice from Earth came back to her like a hand across a crowded station, trying to find a friend before the doors closed. While she worked, Daniel walked the deck. He stopped by each station and asked 1 or 2 questions. He did it to learn, but also to be seen, to let his crew borrow his calm. He knew the value of a quiet leader when panic could spread like fire. The ship's mess hall filled with whispers. People told each other what they had heard, then softened their voices when facts ran out. Someone said a moon had been cracked like a plate. Someone else said Earth had fought for weeks and taken a dozen enemy ships with it. Stories grew because stories are how people hold grief when they cannot touch the truth. When Daniel returned to comms, Sarah had the look she got when a puzzle came together. There is a watermark in the noise, she said. It is old school but smart. Someone used the gaps between the words. She brought up a scope and showed him small spikes timed with the pauses. It is a coordinate block, but it is also a date. The date was recent. The coordinates formed a line that bent toward a sector beyond the ridge. Amelia overlaid star charts. The line crossed 3 outposts and 1 refuel station. 2 of those had gone dark in the past week without notice. One had sent a garbled mayday that everyone had blamed on a solar burst. Eric asked if they were going after whoever did it. Daniel did not answer right away. He stared at the thin map line and thought about the photo in his pocket. He thought about the voice from Earth and how calm it sounded even at the end. He did not know how to carry both his anger and his duty at once. He chose duty because anger could come later and still be sharp. Duty dulled if you let it wait. He sent the packet to command and added a personal note. Request immediate council session. Multi-colony link secure, all hands from Mars. Titan, Europa, Ceres, and the Frontier. He kept it plain. He knew simple words travel faster. The captain on duty signed off and told him to get some rest. He did not argue, but he did not sleep. He went to the observation bay instead. The glass there curved so wide the stars felt like a river you could fall into. He let the dark fill his vision and listened to the quiet hum of the hull. He told himself the hum meant the ship was alive and would keep his people safe. He also knew machines did not promise anything. People promised. People chose. Sarah joined him. She carried 2 paper cups of bad coffee. They stood Sid. The council chamber filled with faces from across the colonies. The link carried a dozen voices, each one strained, each one carrying grief. Daniel Carter sat in front of the live feed aboard the horizon's edge. Sarah Collins kept her headset in place, ready to patch data into the stream. Amelia Ross had a set of charts open, showing the coordinates they had uncovered. Eric Hall stood just behind them, jaw tight as if waiting for someone to give him permission to move. The leaders argued before the call even started. A man from Mars pounded his desk and shouted that the silence from Earth meant war had already begun. A woman from Titan spoke calm but firm, saying they had to prepare for defense, not chase ghosts. A delegate from Europa cried as she asked if anyone had tried to send ships back to Sol. The faces all spoke at once, voices rising until the council chair silenced the noise with a raised hand. Daniel sent the packet of data forward. The recording of Earth's last words echoed through the chamber. The silence that followed felt heavy. People looked down, unable to meet the eyes of others. The words were simple. They were not the kind of words a dying world should send unless they carried weight. You will pay for crossing the line. A promise, not a plea. The chair asked for testimony. Daniel stood. He kept his words plain. He told them how the signal came, how Sarah and Amelia had drawn out the hidden coordinates, how the shard of black metal matched wreckage seen before on the outer edge. He did not embellish. He did not need to. The truth was enough. When he finished, Sarah added a note. She explained how the watermark in the pauses gave both a date and a path. Amelia confirmed it with spectral analysis. Eric said nothing, but his presence was enough to remind them of the pilots waiting in silence, ready to fly if asked. The council debated for hours. Some said striking back would bring destruction. Some said doing nothing would dishonor Earth's memory. At last the decision came. They would prepare. They would unify fleets that had never flown together. They would build not just to defend, but to strike when the time came. On the horizon's edge, the crew watched as the order streamed in. All ships to assemble in orbit over Titan within 6 days. All colonies to contribute ships, weapons, fuel, and crew. The war would not wait. The line had been crossed and humanity would answer. In the days that followed, Daniel barely slept. He walked the decks as messages came in. Civilian freighters were being gutted and armored. Mining ships were welded with gun ports. Pilots volunteered faster than the rosters could fill. Families wept as sons and daughters boarded transports, but none turned away. The words from Earth had burned into their hearts. Sarah spent long nights replaying the message. She broke it into fragments, listened to syllables, listened to breaths between words. She swore she could hear something more. As if the woman speaking had known people like Sarah would one day sit in front of her ghost. She saved copies in every form she knew, determined the words would never be lost. Amelia led teams through old defense logs. She found patterns in how the Draxion had moved. They did not strike random. They struck to cut lines of supply, to blind colonies by removing relays. She mapped their path like a hunter reading tracks in snow. She told Daniel they were not finished. They were moving toward something larger. He believed her. Eric flew drills with the fighter wing. He taught rookies how to fly close, how to trust wingmen, how to dive when sensors screamed. He drilled until their bodies knew the motions better than their minds. He made them paint the words from Earth on their hulls. Some wrote it bold. Some etched it small where only they would see it. But every ship carried it. Daniel met with his officers each night. He asked what they needed, listened, and gave orders that were possible, never ones that were not. He did not pretend this was a war they could win easily, but he told them it was one they could fight with honor. That was enough to keep men and women moving. The fleet gathered above Titan. The sky around the moon glowed with the light of engines. Ships large and small turned in patient circles, waiting for command. From the surface, it looked like a second constellation. Families stood outside domes to watch, their breath misting on the glass. They knew history was rising in the black above them. The Draxion had not yet shown themselves again. But scouts reported strange wakes on the edge of the Perseus Ridge, trails of bent light, the same as the shard Sarah had found. They were not waiting long. On the 6th day, the council ordered the first strike. They would test the strength of their unity on a small outpost. A Draxion listening post near the ridge would be the target. It was the same place the coordinates had pointed. It was a sign, some said, that Earth's final words had chosen their first step. The horizon's edge led the vanguard. Daniel gave the order without hesitation. Sarah manned comms, her hand steady now. Amelia watched sensors for every flicker of change. Eric and his wing took their seats in fighters ready to launch. The fleet burned bright across the void. Hundreds of ships, patched and painted, moved as one. The Draxion outpost waited like a black nail against the stars. No light, no sound. but every instinct screamed it was not empty. The first shots came from the fighters. Eric led them in, weaving between hidden mines, firing bursts that lit the dark. Explosions rolled across the outpost's skin. For a moment, victory seemed quick. Then the Draxion woke. Black ships slid from the shadows, moving with eerie grace. Their hulls bent light, their weapons struck without sound. But the humans fought back. They fought with fury. The fleet held formation, each ship guarding another. Daniel gave orders with sharp clarity. Sarah relayed commands and warnings. Amelia tracked enemy patterns and called weak points. Eric flew like fire, carving paths others could follow. The battle raged for hours. Ships burned. Men and women screamed through comms as hulls cracked. But they did not break. The Draxion, used to easy prey, found themselves struck again and again. For every human ship lost, a Draxion vessel fell in flame. At last, the outpost split apart. A chain of blasts lit the sky, tearing the black structure to dust. The Draxion ships scattered, retreating into the ridge. Humanity's fleet floated bloodied but alive. The silence that followed felt like breath held by 1,000 throats. On the horizon's edge, Daniel looked around his bridge. His crew were tired, bruised, some bleeding, but alive. Sarah replayed the transmission one last time across the comms. Every ship heard the voice of Earth again. "You will pay for crossing the line." Now the words carried proof. They were not just hope. They were truth. The first battle was won, but Daniel knew it was only the start. The Draxion would return. They had crossed the line. Now they had been answered, and the war would spread across the stars. The wreckage of the Draxion outpost drifted in silence. Shattered panels glowed faintly as fire died into sparks. The horizon's edge floated near the ruins with other ships of the fleet. The first battle was done, and the humans had not been broken, but the cost was heavy. Several ships were gone, and hundreds of lives had ended in the dark. No one cheered. They only watched the remains drift and thought of Earth. Daniel Carter walked the bridge slowly. His eyes met the faces of his crew. They were tired, marked by smoke and strain, but they stood firm. Sarah Collins sat at comms, replaying fragments of signals to be sure no hidden warning was left. Amelia Ross stared at her sensor board, mapping what was left of the enemy formation. Eric Hall was still in his flight suit, helmet at his side, sweat running down his face. He had lost friends, and he did not hide the pain, but his jaw was set hard. The council sent a brief message of praise, but Daniel knew the truth. One battle did not win a war. The Draxion would come again, stronger, sharper, and angrier. The colonies had lit a fire, and now they had to keep it burning. The fleet pulled back to Titan for repairs. Dockyards that once built cargo ships now hammered armor plates into war hulls. Engineers worked day and night. Families gathered at the domes to watch, some cheering, some silent, but all knowing history was being written above their heads. Earth's silence had united them in a way politics never could. Inside the horizon's edge, Sarah worked without pause. She copied the last words of Earth into every database she could touch. She wanted no chance of the message being lost. Sometimes she whispered the words as she worked. A mantra to keep her steady. Amelia studied the shards of enemy metal. She tested how they bent light and how they absorbed power. She told Daniel the Draxion ships hid behind tricks, not invincibility. Eric pushed his pilots harder. He flew drills until his hands shook. He wanted them ready for the next strike and the one after that. Daniel spent his hours speaking with commanders across the fleet. He spoke plain and simple. He asked for status. He offered what his crew had learned. He reminded them that fear was natural, but retreat was death. He ended each call the same way. Hold the line. For Earth, days passed. Rumors spread of Draxion fleets massing in the ridge. Scouts vanished. 2 colonies near the outer belt went silent. Families sent desperate messages to the council. The pressure grew. People wanted revenge, but they also feared destruction. The council ordered the fleet to prepare for a deep strike. They wanted to take the fight to the Draxion before the enemy swept into human space. The target was a larger station deeper in the ridge, one that supplied fuel and weapons to Draxion ships. Destroying it would slow their advance, but it would also risk the fleet. Daniel knew it. Sarah knew it. Amelia and Eric knew it. Still, no one argued. The line had been crossed. They could not turn back. The fleet launched again. Hundreds of ships moved through the black, each one carrying the weight of lost lives and the hope of the living. The horizon's edge took point, leading fighters and frigates into the shadows. The ridge loomed ahead, full of rocks that glowed faintly with trapped light. It was a maze where ships could vanish without trace. Amelia guided the fleet through with sensors tuned to the faint ripples left by Draxion engines. Sarah monitored comms for any sign of a trap. Eric flew at the head of his wing, steady but ready. Daniel sat calm, his voice steady as he gave each order. The station appeared first as a shadow, then as a mass of black angles fused into rock. It clung to an asteroid like a parasite. Lights pulsed faintly along its skin. The sight made the bridge quiet. Everyone knew what it meant. This was no listening post. This was a fortress. The first wave of fighters struck fast. Eric led them in, weaving through bursts of light. The Draxion reacted with precision. Their ships rose from hiding, gliding like shadows with weapons sharp as knives. The battle began in full. The Horizon's Edge fired broadside volleys, its cannons pounding against the station's shields. Other human ships joined, light and fire flashing across the ridge. Fighters darted between blasts, striking at weak points. Sarah shouted warnings as enemy craft flanked. Amelia called out shield drops, guiding fire to the right spots. Daniel kept his voice clear, steadying the crew as chaos raged. The Draxion fought harder than before. Their ships moved like dancers, twisting through human lines. Many pilots died. Eric lost 3 wingmen in the first 10 minutes. His voice cracked once, then steadied as he ordered the rest to hold formation. He struck back with fury, taking down 2 enemy ships with a single burst. Hours passed like minutes. The station held strong, but cracks began to show. Amelia spotted power surges in its core. She told Daniel it was close to breaking. He gave the order for all ships to focus fire. Cannons roared. Missiles tore through Black Hull. Eric and his fighters delivered final blows to shield towers. At last, the station split, light pouring out as it broke apart. The Draxion pulled back again, vanishing into the ridge. Humanity had struck a second time and lived, but the cost was worse. A third of the fleet was gone. Fires burned on many ships. The Horizon's Edge carried wounded in its hulls. Men and women screamed in pain, and medics worked without rest. Daniel walked the ship after the battle. He saw pilots sitting in silence, staring at walls. He saw Sarah asleep at her console, headset still in place. He saw Amelia holding a shard of black metal, her eyes burning with questions. He saw Eric alone in the hangar, head bowed over the names of those he had lost. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. Eric looked up, his face wet, but he nodded. They both knew grief was part of war. The fleet limped back from the ridge. Colonies welcomed them with tears and cheers, but the soldiers knew the truth. The Draxion were still out there, waiting, watching. Earth was gone, but its last words burned brighter now. You will pay for crossing the line. Humanity had spoken twice, and twice the Draxion had felt it. But the war was only beginning. Daniel sent a report to the council. He wrote in simple words. He told them victory came with loss. He told them the Draxion were strong but not gods. He told them the colonies had proven unity. And he told them the fight was far from over. In the quiet after, Daniel stood alone at the window of his ship. Stars stretched endless. He thought of the photo in his pocket, of a blue shoreline and a boy with a kite. He thought of Earth's silence. He thought of the promise they now carried. His voice was low, almost a whisper. We will keep it. We will make them pay. The Horizon's Edge drifted in silence, but inside hearts beat with fire. The colonies were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. The Draxion had awakened something old and fierce. Humanity had lost its home, but it had found its strength. And in the battles yet to come, that strength would shake the stars. The fleet stayed in orbit over Titan for repairs after the second strike. The docks burned bright through the night, welding sparks falling like rain. Ships limped in, some missing whole sections, some barely able to hold air. Crews carried the wounded out in stretchers. The colonies had won again, but the victory felt heavy. For every cheer that rose from the domes, there were whispers of names that would never return. Daniel Carter walked the narrow halls of the Horizon's Edge. He checked each station, spoke with each officer, and gave small words of calm. He had learned that calm spread if it was carried by the right hands. Sarah Collins had not left her station in 2 days. She played Earth's last message on repeat while she scanned fragments of enemy code. She said there were signals in the static that no one had cracked yet. Amelia Ross spent her hours in the labs, testing shards of Draxion hull. She said the metal had memory, that it shifted its bonds under stress like a living thing. Eric Hall spent his time in the hangar with his pilots, drilling until their arms shook. He taught them to fight with fewer ships, to protect each other closer, to strike sharper. The council met again. The delegates looked more worn than before. Their voices carried less doubt now, more resolve. The two battles had proved something. Humanity could bleed the Draxion. They were not untouchable. But the council also knew the Draxion would not stop. If the colonies only defended, they would be crushed. They needed a plan to break the enemy. Reports came in from scouts who had tracked the Draxion further into the ridge. They found evidence of a main fleet, larger than anything seen before. Hundreds of ships, maybe more, hidden in the dark. They were gathering for something big. Sarah's analysis of the watermark in Earth's message gave them a clue. She said Earth had not fallen in one strike. The planet had fought for weeks using weapons hidden deep underground. She found records that Earth had damaged the Draxion badly before the silence came. Earth's last words had not been despair. They had been warning and promise. Amelia told Daniel she had a plan. She wanted to rebuild a weapon from the remains of Earth's old orbital grid. Wreckage still floated in Sol, scattered but not gone. If they could gather enough, they could craft a beam powerful enough to tear through the Draxion fleet. It would take time, skill, and sacrifice. Daniel listened, then nodded. They would try. The council approved. Ships were sent to Sol to salvage what was left. Crews wept when they saw the Earth from orbit. The surface was scarred, burned in wide scars. Cities lay as ash. Oceans glowed with strange light. Yet above the ruin, pieces of the old defense stations drifted, waiting. The salvage teams worked in silence, pulling beams and cores, gathering anything that could serve. Every piece carried memory, and the crews treated them with care. On Titan, Amelia built her weapon. She called it the Lance. It was a massive array designed to focus power from fusion cores into a single shot. Engineers worked day and night under her lead. Sarah helped by building the guidance system, linking it with the old codes hidden in Earth's final transmission. Eric trained to escort the convoys that carried parts. He fought off raiders and ambushes, losing more pilots but never the cargo. Daniel watched it all unfold. He kept the fleet steady while the Lance took shape. He knew the Draxion were not blind. They would strike before it was finished. He made the crews prepare for that day. He reminded them again and again that Earth had fought to its last breath. They could do no less. The strike came sooner than expected. A wave of Draxion ships burst from the ridge, heading straight for Titan. Alarms echoed through the domes. Families rushed into shelters. The fleet scrambled. The Lance was not ready. Its frame stood tall, but its heart was still untested. Daniel gave orders without hesitation. The horizon's edge and half the fleet moved to intercept. Eric and his fighters launched first, diving into the black swarm. The battle was fierce from the start. Draxion ships poured in endless lines, their weapons cutting human hulls like knives. But the humans held. They fought in tight formation, guarding the unfinished Lance with their lives. Sarah shouted warnings across the comms, catching enemy flanks before they struck. Amelia worked from the ground, patching power lines into the Lance even as the battle raged. Sparks rained over her, but she did not stop. Eric flew like a man possessed, rallying his pilots, striking with deadly precision. Daniel's voice carried calm through the chaos, giving orders sharp and steady. The Draxion pushed harder, sensing the Lance. They sent waves of bombers toward it. Eric and his squadron cut them down, but losses grew. Ships fell burning into Titan's skies. On the ground, families cried as wreckage rained beyond the domes. Amelia screamed into the comms that the Lance was ready for a test shot. Daniel gave the order. Power surged through the array. The first beam fired a thin line of white light. It struck a Draxion cruiser and split it in half. The fleet roared with hope, but the beam drained too much. Systems burned out. The Lance shut down before a second shot. The humans fought to buy time while Amelia and her engineers repaired. Hours passed in fire and blood. Sarah's voice cracked from shouting. Eric lost half his wing, but he refused to fall back. Daniel watched the enemy press closer and closer. At last, Amelia's voice came through. Ready again? Daniel gave the word. The Lance fired once more, this time brighter, stronger. The beam tore through 3 enemy ships in one pass. The Draxion faltered. Fear rippled through their formation. They pulled back, not in retreat, but in caution. They had seen the Lance. They knew humanity carried a weapon that could wound them deeply. The fleet held the line. The Draxion withdrew into the ridge, leaving wreckage behind. Titan lived another day. Cheers rose in the domes. Families poured from shelters. But the joy was sharp-edged. Too many were gone. Too many ships would never return. Daniel stood on the bridge, smoke still drifting from damaged consoles. He looked at his crew. Sarah's eyes were red, Amelia's hands black with burns, Eric's face lined with grief. Yet they stood. They were alive. They had held the line. He gave a simple order. Play it. Sarah pressed the key. Earth's last message filled the comms again. You will pay for crossing the line. The words echoed across the fleet, across Titan, across every colony listening. They were more than words now. They were a vow. The lance stood tall on Titan's surface, still incomplete, still flawed, but real. The colonies poured their strength into finishing it. The Draxian had seen it and would come again in greater numbers. But humanity had a weapon, a plan, and a purpose. They would fight. They would endure. And when the time came, they would carry Earth's promise into the heart of the enemy. The Draxian did not wait long before they returned. Weeks after the battle for Titan, scouts brought warnings of a massive fleet moving from the ridge. It was larger than anything humanity had ever faced. Hundreds of ships glided through the dark, their black hulls bending light. They were heading straight for Titan and the Lance. The colonies knew this was it. The final battle had come. The horizon's edge was placed at the center of the fleet. Daniel Carter stood tall on the bridge, calm as ever. Sarah Collins checked comms, rerouting channels to make sure no signal was lost. Amelia Ross worked on the Lance, running final tests to keep it from burning out after only one shot. Eric Hall and his pilots stood ready in the hangar, their ships painted with the words from Earth. You will pay for crossing the line. The Council sent one last message to every ship, every colony. Hold, fight, win for Earth. It was short and plain. No one needed more. Families gathered in domes and stations across the colonies, holding hands, praying, or simply watching the stars. They all knew history was about to be written in fire. The Draxian arrived like a storm. Their fleet stretched wide, black shapes blotting out the stars. They moved with silent grace, their weapons glowing faint red. Daniel gave the first order. The horizon's edge fired its cannons, joined by hundreds of ships. The sky lit with fire. The war had begun. Eric launched with his wing, cutting through the first wave. He flew fast and sharp, weaving between blasts, firing with deadly aim. Pilots died around him, but he kept them steady, calling targets, warning of traps. His voice carried calm fury, a mirror of Daniel's. Together they held the front line. Sarah caught fragments of enemy chatter, strange signals buried in static. She shouted warnings as enemy ships flanked. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed clear. She relayed Daniel's orders across the fleet, her words a lifeline in the chaos. Amelia stayed with the Lance, sweat pouring down her face as she balanced power cores. She whispered to herself, urging the machine to hold. The first hours were brutal. Ships burned on both sides. The colonies fought with desperation, the Draxian with cold precision. The Lance fired once, tearing through 5 enemy cruisers in a single beam. The colonies roared with hope. But the power drained fast, leaving Amelia and her engineers scrambling to recharge. The Draxian pressed harder. They sent bombers in waves, aiming straight for the Lance. Eric and his wing intercepted, fighting like demons. He lost more pilots, each name a cut in his heart, but he kept flying. Daniel watched the lines and shifted ships to plug holes, his orders sharp, his tone steady. The horizon's edge itself took heavy fire, its hull cracked, but it did not fall. At last, Amelia shouted that the Lance was ready again. Daniel gave the word. The beam fired, brighter than before. It tore a path through the enemy fleet, burning holes in their formation. For the first time, the Draxian faltered. They pulled back a step, unsure. The humans pressed forward, shouting their vow. You will pay. The Draxian rallied, sending their largest ships forward. Massive carriers, bristling with weapons, pushed into the fight. The colonies struggled, but they did not break. Daniel kept the fleet together, his calm voice guiding them through chaos. Sarah relayed every signal, her voice hoarse but unyielding. Eric dove into the heart of the enemy, striking the carriers again and again. Amelia screamed as the Lance overloaded, but she held it steady, forcing one more shot. The beam fired, ripping through a carrier and splitting it apart. The sky lit with fire. The battle raged for hours more. Titan shook as debris rained from the sky. Domes cracked but held. Families watched as streaks of light cut across the heavens. On the horizon's edge, Daniel never left his post. He stood through smoke and fire, steady as stone. Sarah collapsed once, but she pulled herself back up, refusing to leave her console. Amelia burned her hands on live wires but kept the lance alive. Eric lost nearly all his wing, but he flew on, refusing to yield. At last, the Draxian broke. Their ship scattered, pulling back into the dark. The lance fired one final shot, sealing their retreat. Silence fell over the battlefield. The colonies had held. The Draxian were defeated. The cost was terrible. Half the fleet was gone. Thousands lay dead. But Titan still stood. The lance still glowed. And Earth's promise had been kept. Daniel looked around his bridge. His crew were broken, bruised, but alive. He spoke softly, only 4 words. For Earth, we endure. Sarah replayed the last transmission one final time. The voice from Earth echoed across the fleet. You will pay for crossing the line. This time the words carried victory. Across the colonies, people wept and cheered. They mourned their dead, but they also stood taller. They had faced the storm and survived. The Draxian had learned fear. Humanity had proven it would not bow. On the surface of Titan, families gathered outside domes to watch the stars. Children pointed at the glowing wreckage. Elders whispered the names of the fallen. But all of them knew one truth. Humanity had changed. It was no longer scattered colonies. It was one people, united by fire and loss and hope. Daniel stood in the observation bay, the photo of the shoreline still in his pocket. He thought of Earth, of the boy with the kite, of the promise spoken in that last voice. He whispered a vow to himself. We will build again. We will carry Earth with us. Sarah joined him, leaning tired against the glass. Amelia came with her hands still wrapped in bandages. Eric limped in, face lined but eyes steady. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. They knew the war was not truly over. The Draxian still lived, but they had won this day, and they had proven something greater. Humanity was stronger than fear. The lance stood tall, a symbol of Earth's last words made real. The colonies began to rebuild, to prepare, to dream again. The silence from Earth would never be broken, but its voice lived on in them, a voice of strength, of promise, of vengeance, and of hope. The last transmission from Earth had been simple. It had been a vow, and now across the stars that vow had been kept.